This week, we're going to talk about diversification, and every business has its primary sales channels. So if you're a consumer business, that might be obviously e-commerce, that might be in-person retail, it could be wholesale channels, things like that. How do you diversify across them? What are the pros and cons, and how do you do it in a way that makes sense?
I think you set yourself up almost for a double whammy if you have very few or one single business channel. When unexpected things happen, like the situation we're in right now, the more diversification you have, the more balanced your risk portfolio is, the better your ability to pivot and change and take advantage of opportunities in certain channels, but also mitigate risk in certain channels.
If you have just one, like we talked about, like you're super vulnerable, but building multiple sales channels is hard. You have to invest in them. And so what does that mean? If you're e-commerce only, you should think about wholesale. If you're Amazon only, you should consider e-commerce, and that's not necessarily the same thing. If you're retail, then you need to clearly invest in e-commerce. And right now, if you're only in-store retail, like you're most likely hurting or in a lot of pain. This is sort of at the core of the issue.
Piggybacking off of some of the conversation we had last week about being strategic and taking some time to really think about what channel you're in today and what other channels are out there. Kind of put a strategic hat on to think about it. Maybe there's a matrix you can build. I think it might be a little different for different businesses and different industries. I think we would prioritize typically, like, you want to be as close to the customer as possible, right? Some channels you're very close to the customer, others you're further away. What's the profit margin? Different channels have different profit margins, right? What's the cost? What would you have to invest to build out a channel or grow a particular channel? When you start to lay all those different aspects out and build your own matrix, right, to assess the different channels, I think it can become a little clearer on maybe where you want to go next. And that can help you maybe in some of the decision making.
I would say historically, the way that things have been done is there is this relationship with retail outlets that the product creators, the company themselves, there's an unspoken, and many times there's contracts that in the past that have said, you will not go directly to consumer if we're going to represent you, say, in a Walmart or a store or some sort of retail. Even historically online, when e-commerce was new. In other words, I'm not going to compete with you because you can always sell it cheaper because you create and own the product. Why would I want to buy 10,000 units and sell it in a store for $10 when you can sell it on your website for $7? That has been historically the situation, but things have changed, and almost every creator of the product themselves, the owner of the brand, etc., has an online store and a retail presence. So you can go and find it at a local location many times, or you can buy it directly from the brand themselves. That's certainly the prerogative. And I would say to the e-commerce, to the company, to the store owner, don't be afraid of that. You need to own the customer, because at the end of the day, you don't want someone else owning and controlling your brand and your audience. The stores, yes, they've invested a lot of money to attract people into their store, but it's your product. And so I think you need to be thinking about moving toward having your own retail space, seeing it as just another outlet, because there will always be certain people that want to go see it, touch it, feel it, and buy it in person. But then there'll be people that want their version of the same thing, is opening their laptop and buying it and having it shipped to their house. You got to be willing to tell your retail outlets, if they threaten to pull you from the shelf, if you go direct, you say, well, it's a risk I'm going to have to take. I know you're going to have to navigate those carefully. You need to diversify, and you need to own your customer flow. You need to own the e-commerce, and you need to own the retail channel and diversify that retail channel.
I think we all, even I, want to talk about the big business, right? Because that's where you hear this a lot. You hear about that conflict. But I think the way people shop today, everybody's gotten a little bit smaller in many ways, right? I understand there's Amazons and Nikes and all these big brands out there. There's a lot of small brands. I think for them, when I think about that, I try to equate it to my experience there. And one is, you're not going to be an expert at everything. Yay, if you can get into Walmart, that has its own individual pros and cons. But a lot of times the planning starts before you even get to that level. You have to really be thinking about the KPIs of the business and your product planning that leads up to decisions to do this diversifying. Because what you don't want to do is diversify poorly, and that's real, right? So keep some exclusive lines to yourself. Think about how you're going to product plan for one side of your business versus another. If you're already kind of a retail person and you're going the other way, in many ways it's a little easier depending on your relationship. But if you're online trying to go the out, which is what probably a lot of young businesses are doing, put yourself first, fight for that. I think Bob kind of mentioned that. The rules have changed a little bit. Give them a couple of lines to do with what they want, and keep a lot for yourself. So again, I think the planning is a big piece of it.
It's a massive challenge, Ryan, because it's a very slippery slope. You give them a couple lines, and we know merchants where this has happened get picked up by Walmart, and you go from being a $2 million business to a $10 million business in the space of 18 months. And $7.5 million is coming from Walmart. So when Walmart tells you, we want to lower prices, we want you to change your product line, we want all your product lines, it becomes very, very difficult to say no, unless you're willing to say, I'm okay going back to being a $5 million company, which we know with business owners is extremely difficult. I think that's the challenge with wholesale, getting into wholesale and not letting the tail wag the dog. I mean, I know a company I'm thinking of right now, where as their wholesalers were squeezing them on margins and wanting lower cost products, and they changed their manufacturing and it went to scale, product quality went down, they lost touch with the customer, they weren't really a brand that mattered anymore. They were still growing, but ultimately it was self-destructive.
For more information and ways we can help your business, head over to Metacake.com. Thanks, and never stop growing.